I call the member for Wright.
Oh, thank you, Mr Speaker. And I rise to speak on the Public Service Amendment Bill 2012. And the bill seeks to make a number of amendments to the Public Service Act of 1999 to ensure that the Australian Public Service is able to continue serving the Australian Government, the Parliament and the Australian public to a high standard of ethics, efficiency and effectiveness. Mr Speaker, it is no secret that the Liberal Party policy, when in government, is to reduce the amount of public servants. This is a line which is consistent with other states at the moment. But when I have the opportunity to speak with public servants in Canberra, relationships that I've made before coming to this place that I still have contact with, there is an element of frustration when you're having conversations with these people of the growing amount of compliance and burdens which surround their day-to-day activities. I have no doubt that the public service works extremely hard and they go home physically exhausted trying to maintain and upkeep compliance provisions that are thrust upon them. I also get the opportunity to witness the frustration that inhibits itself or surrounds itself with our customs, our frontline staff, as resources are taken from them. Recently I've returned from the Somalian coastline on HMAS Anzac, where I spent time with Australian Defence Force personnel who are eminently frustrated with Labor's cutbacks in defence to the tune of roughly $2 billion and the impacts that it has on their lives. But when we talk about reduction of public servants, we on the coalition side don't talk about reductions at the front line. It's the back-end office. It's the back-end stuff that we will be focusing our energies on. How can we as a government, when it comes to public service amendments or reform, ask the Australian businesses, mums and dads, to tighten their belt with continually growing, I think it's now up to 30 new taxes? How can we ask businesses to tighten their belts when we have seen, since 2007, the public service exponentially grow by roughly 22,000 personnel? 22,000. And when I talk to my businesses in the electorate of Wright and ask them for feedback on how their day in their business is made easier by the number of public servants that are there, I'm often met with a very similar result or a comment of, my day hasn't got easier. In fact, it's got harder. I'm burdened with compliance. The Australian Institute of Chamber of Commerce and Westpac survey for the 17th consecutive quarter has indicated that the single biggest inhibitor of business growth is government taxes and compliance. On May 8, 2010, the then Prime Minister announced that the government had accepted all of the recommendations made in the earlier March release report ahead of the game, the blueprint for the reform of the Australian Government administration. This report, the blueprint, outlined a comprehensive reform agenda to position the Australian public service to better serve the Australian Government and the Australian community. It is an agenda that requires modernisation of the Public Service Act, bringing it into line with contemporary needs. The amendment of the bill will strengthen the management and the leadership of the public service and help to embed new practices and behaviours into its culture. Now, when we talk about new practices and new behaviours, the public service is quite an oddity, because when you go through, as a businessman, before coming here as well, when we go through a line item, we don't start with a bucket of money whereby we have the mindset that if we don't appropriate this line item, we'll lose it. Business doesn't do that. That money drops to the bottom of your balance sheet and it becomes net profit. So when we look for areas of waste or areas that we can be more efficient or diligent, there are a number of commercial practices, and I understand that in the whole cold hard light of reality, administrators shouldn't or cannot on occasions be treat their position as commercial. But it's interesting to do an analysis of the difference of mindsets. This bill recognises that the delivery of high-quality services and the policy advice requires effective and committed leadership, supported by a public service that is efficient, driven by its desire to serve the community and contemporary in its outlook. Presently, Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister has the role to appoint departmental secretaries to another role, and if their department has been abolished, or if the position is terminated, both of those situations seem rare. Of concern, however, this bill will give the Prime Minister greater powers to extend the employment of departmental secretaries, allowing the Prime Minister to create new positions for secretaries who have resigned for those contracts that have ended. The Prime Minister recently did this with Mr Ken Henry when he resigned his position from the Secretary of the Treasury in April 2011, then to be appointed as a Special Advisor under Section 67 of the Constitution. Should this legislation be passed, the Prime Minister will have the power to create similar roles for any secretary who resigns or contracts have been expired. This is a measure which would add to the number of public servants, and as such, it's in conflict with our policy, which I mentioned earlier, to reduce the public service numbers. Overall, the Coalition does not oppose this bill. However, the Coalition proposes to amend the legislation by removing changes to Section 60 to the Public Service Act, which will allow the Prime Minister to extend the terms of the departmental secretaries who have resigned or whose contracts have ended. At present, the Prime Minister has only the power to appoint departmental secretaries to another role if their department has been abolished or if she has terminated them for their position, both being rare occurrences. The changes to Section 60 will allow the Prime Minister, at will, to appoint departmental secretaries to new roles should they resign or when their terms of service expire and or are not renewed. This has the potential to be the beginning of a practice similar to the New South Wales unattached list, which applies to chiefs and SES levels. Now, before coming to this place, I'm only a new member, I had no idea that there was such thing as an unattached list. And learning and sharing with the Australian people, an unattached list is actually quite a common occurrence in government when you have a high-ranking official on normally superior wage bands, when their tasks or duties become complete, or their jobs are refilled with other positions, rather than in the commercial world you would take a back seat or you'd be looking for another job. But these guys are actually kept on what we call, or I'm now learned to understand, an unattached list. Well, I cannot point to anywhere. I cannot point to anywhere in the commercial world or the corporate world or in mums and dads' businesses where that practice exists. It bewilders me. Whilst this legislation at the moment is limited to secretaries, it sets a precedent. It is contrary to our policy in to reduce rather than increase the public payroll. In New South Wales, Premier O'Farrell is moving to end the unattached list with a reported initial saving of $16 million a year by removing 250 persons from the list. Well, if we've got state governments moving to reduce these lists and current legislation moving to introduce the list, I can stand here and only say that I'm proud to be a part of the Liberal Party camp. If the Prime Minister has the authority to extend the employment of departmental secretaries indefinitely, the potential for even greater politicalisation of these roles could occur. In Queensland, we're making reductions to the public service, trying to reunite the state with some economic credibility and accountability. Whilst the loss of our credit rating in Queensland is not completely attributable to the public service, there are ultimately our capacity to lose our credit rating is diminished by the fact that we are spending more than we are earning. We are spending more than we are earning. So, as a result, tough decisions have to make. And I feel for the public servants that will ultimately lose their job, both in New South Wales and in Queensland, and into the future here in Canberra. But however, I encourage I encourage the Australian Labor Party, when making these appointments into the future, that history has a tendency of repeating ourselves. We are a government that ultimately pays back enormous debts, and we are a government that ultimately tries to reduce overheads. Bear that in mind when in government, in trying to make prudent fiscal decisions. For the good of things, for all the good things that this bill might bring to the Australian public service, it's the Labor way to surround themselves with those that may stay the political line. Convenient appointments of ex-department secretaries into other roles under the discretion of the Prime Minister is not something that needs to be endorsed by legislation. At the 15th of March 2012, the head of the Treasury will make $615,000 a year, rising through to $653,000, and then by 2014, $805,000 a year. Not a bad gig if you can get it. On the 13th of February 2012, Ms Renee Loam from the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet told Senate estimates that Dr Henry was working 2.5 days a week. Assuming that's still the case, and allegedly, if Dr Henry is still engaged in the Prime Minister's office on 2.5 days a week, he could be picking up around $402,000 a year by 2014. Not bad salary for someone who's part-time. I don't suspect that Dr Henry is actually claiming that, as he's now a director or involved in the National Bank of Australia in some capacity. I first learned about Dr Henry's involvement with the Australian Labor Party when I had the opportunity to read The Australian Moment, a book recently put out by George Megalogenis. And up until that point, I had no idea that Dr Henry had actually spent some time in previous Prime Minister's office in the way of Bob Hawke, and also did some work with Paul Keating in then the floating of the Australian dollar. I can't take anything away from the guy's capacity, but it does bring into question the capacity of politicians' salaries which are on the public record. When we start looking at salary bands of around $805,000, ours tend to fall into insignificant, yet we take the political heat of defending those in the electorates. Deputy Speaker, the Coalition will seek to amend the legislation by proposing the removal of Section 60 of this bill. The public service sector should at least be seen to be non-political or impartial. These amendments seek to protect those public servants who do go about conducting their duties without any unbiased skewer. We support merit selection basis. We support a transparent application process. And I think with the political tact that Dr Henry has shown in the past in serving Prime Minister of this nation, one can only assume that he has left himself exposed and accepting a position with, by all accounts, limited transparent application processes for the position that he holds currently in the Prime Minister's office. Those comments are on the public record. That I believe that there was no advertised position, there was no selection criteria to apply for. It was just a very cosy, friendly little "you're with us now," and as a result, the government has led with a glass jaw on this one, and yeah, I wouldn't support that further practices along those lines be continued. I thank the Speaker.